You just came with a product that no one has ever released, and you're wondering how to price it. There's different things that you have to consider, but anchoring is definitely one of them. So in this class, we see a bunch of heuristic traps, a bunch of biases that lead people to think in a certain way. And anchoring is one of them. So if ever you've always noticed that a certain price is for a certain product is, let's say, $500, and all of a sudden it's $300, you have the feeling that this is a deal. Well, if it's something that you've commonly seen and it's just been on the market for a long time and you actually notice that the price is lower, you might in fact be truthful in thinking that it's a deal because of that. It actually is. But sometimes you might get tricked a little bit. So let's say you're in a different country and you walk around and you're looking at buying a t-shirt. And you ask the first seller that has a specific t-shirt that you're interested in and tells you $20. So $20 becomes your reference point. It becomes your initial amount of money that you value this product. If you go to the next seller and they tell you that it's more than $20, you'll think that this person's overcharging and the first seller was actually a good price. But if on the other hand, you see another seller and this person tells you it's $10 for the exact same t-shirt, you think that this could be a good deal because the first price that you got was your anchor. It's a situation where you kind of reference, you change all your valuation regards to that initial price, and then you could have this impression of having a good deal. So when there's limited knowledge of how much a product actually costs, what's the procedure that you go through to try to see what price you should be paying? Well, it's this kind of sampling process. If I were to ask you how much does a specific product that you've bought many times at the grocery store or many times at the clothing store cost here in your home country, well, the answer would be pretty quick. But if you go to another country, let's say you go on vacation to Norway or you go on vacation to Vietnam, and I ask you, well, how much do you think a t-shirt costs? Or how much do you think a coffee costs or a beer costs? Well, you might not know. And because of that, you're going to start sampling and asking for different prices. Well, the same thing occurs when you're buying anything that you're not aware of what's a typical price for it. If ever you get your house built and you're wondering, well, how much does metal siding on the roof cost? Or how much does building a deck cost? Well, unless you start doing researches, if you've never bought this product before, you don't have much of an idea. So you're going to ask different entrepreneurs, like, how much would you charge for this specific dimension and wood type and so on and so forth. And from there, the first person would give you a price, and that becomes kind of your reference price. And then afterwards, if you see lower prices, well, you'll think that this first person was overcharging, and therefore I'm getting a good deal. And when do you stop? Well, when do you stop also relates to another situation, another problem that you could look into online, which is called the secretary problem. It's this research that was based on this idea of every day, and you could relate this to relationships, every day you meet a new potential secretary to help you with your work, and that person has a certain set of attributes, and you have to decide whether you hire this person or not. And if you choose not to hire them, well, the next day and every day so on, going forward, you'll meet a new secretary, but you will no longer have access to the initial secretary. And at some point, you have to say, okay, I'm happy, this is a perfect secretary for me, and so on. And you could think about the same thing when you think about relationships. Let's say you've been in a relationship for a long time and now you become single. You're not really sure what you're worth in a certain way, what you can get, or you lose your job and you're not really sure, well, what can I negotiate? Can I get a much higher paying job? And so on. So you're not really sure at first. And the same thing with the secretary. With the secretary, you might get a really good candidate coming up first, but the thought goes, well, maybe I could get better. But after you receive the candidacy of a few secretaries, you're going to notice that maybe the first one or these ones are kind of like you rate them like 80% or 8 on 10 or whatever. And then you receive this 90% kind of candidate and this person stands out. And you're like, okay, this one I've seen a bunch, or I've seen a bunch of t-shirts selling for $10, and all of a sudden this person's charging $5. This is a good deal. So it takes you a certain level of sampling to try to figure out what the value is, and then you could attribute whether this is a good deal or not. But it remains that you'll often anchor yourself to that initial price. And associated to that, there's 2 videos that I will link in this video here that I suggest you guys to watch. One's by Dan Ariely that covers a bunch of concepts, but covers the concept of when free is dangerous. And it's related to all the digital services that are offered that are often offered for free, and how it's hard to break that chain of having people used to a product being free. They got used to it, so they got anchored to it, and now you're trying to break away. Same kind of challenge happened with Starbucks, who, when they entered the market, they were competing against like different donut and coffee shops, and they had to try to break free of what people were used to paying for a coffee and now pay a premium price for their coffee. And one of the way that they did this is by differentiating themselves. They didn't become a donut shop with the coffee. They could have become a premium donut shop with their premium coffee, but it might have been harder to differentiate yourself. So the idea here is we created a new service out there, a new product. Don't compare us to those products, because if you do, you'll notice that it's really expensive for this specific product. Even though it's coffee and coffee, it's not the same thing. So that's a way to get away from it. The other video talks a lot about people pricing different kind of services, whether it may be producing a logo or other services, which is hard to evaluate the actual cost. Okay, when you think about creating a logo or a brand, well, how much time does it actually take and so on? You don't really know. And similarly, a friend of mine who cuts down trees and everything else of that nature, climbs up the tree. Well, for someone who's hiring his services might not have a good idea of what to expect. And there's different strategies associated to that on how you could price yourself. The strategy may be to price yourself high at first so that afterwards, when the price goes down, you're still have a really high price, and you shouldn't notice that price, or you shouldn't state that price nice and early. And there's different strategies to bring someone to believing that this is the value associated to it. But the only danger of charging a really high price at first is if someone else can offer the same service, similarly to the t-shirt example, that's seen as being practically identical. If that's the case, and they go and take your bid, and then they take a second bid and it's much lower, you're definitely going to get wiped off. There's no way they'll call you back. They'll think that you tried to overcharge them and so on, and you'll be blacklisted. So there is some dangers associated to that. But anchoring has a lot of power when it comes to influencing how people think of a certain value. There's a series of experiments that kind of look at this idea of anchoring. One of them says like calculate 1 times 2 all the way to times 8. And the other one is calculating from 8 times 7 all the way down to times 1. You have the same numbers and the same multiplication. But in the first scenario, you're starting with the small numbers, and in the second scenario, you're starting with the larger numbers. And if you ask people to guess how much this number would add up to being with all the multiplications, the people that started with the higher numbers guess higher, because they do the first calculations and they quickly notice that it's going to be really high. They anchor themselves around those high numbers, so they'll guess really high, whereas the other group will anchor more around the smaller numbers and they'll guess low. So we have to be aware of how anchoring influences our decision making, and part of that concept is also associated to priming, which I will cover in a separate video. I'll link that as the next video to watch. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll talk to you soon. If If you found this video interesting, please consider subscribing or joining my class where I guide you to apply and expand on the information found in these videos to real-life examples. Have a good day.